welcome to the first event of the fall for the New York Society for General Semantics.
Yay! Oh.
No, you can, yes, applaud, applause. Okay, good. The New York Society for General Semantics was founded in 1946. Applause.
You don't look that old.
Yes, and we've been running programs of this nature for a long time, and in particularly these panel discussions here at the Players for 2 years now. We're starting on our 3rd year. I didn't even have to say applause this time. This is great.
Trainable.
And we bring you these programs free of charge. We don't charge you anything for coming here or any kind of membership dues. However, we do recommend and in fact encourage you to join the Institute of General Semantics, to become members of that organization, which we look upon as our kind of parent organization. And the Institute of General Semantics publishes the quarterly journal, etc., a review of general semantics, and holds the annual Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture and Symposium, which the New York Society is proud to co-sponsor.
Coming up in 3 weeks.
And this year, the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture will take place on Friday evening, October 26th, at the Princeton Club, which is in Midtown. Not as much character as this place, but a nice place to visit nonetheless. And the lecture will be delivered by Diane Ackerman, who is well known as an author both of nonfiction and poetry. We're very much looking forward to that. And it will be followed by a 2-day symposium also at the Princeton Club all day Saturday, and then for the morning hours on Sunday. And all the information will be available on the Institute of General Semantics website, right? And if you're a member of the IGS, you can come to the dinner before the Korzybski lecture.
With a guest.
With a guest. With a guest?
Yay!
A +1.
$50. You're losing money on every member.
$50?
Yes.
That's all?
Yeah.
You just
What
got
if
a
you-
check tonight.
What if you're a student?
Your student is $25.
Only $25 if you're a student? Such a deal?
Such a deal.
Such a deal. Well, so that you can Google Institute of General Semantics, but there also are links from the New York Society site where those events, both events are listed. That will take you to the General Semantics site where you can get all the information, instructions, etc.
Do they have snail mail too?
Do they have snail mail? Does the Institute of General Semantics have snail mail?
Do they send mail out?
Google the Institute to get the snail mail address.
She's just making trouble.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Well, be that as it may, I want to begin by noting that when we go back to the beginnings of general semantics, which was founded by Alfred Korzybski, and the initial concern was a political one. And Korzybski asked, why can't we all get along? Right? And particularly on a political level, why can't politicians find agreement and work together just like scientists and engineers do in whatever they're working on? And why is it so hard? And his initial idea was, well, maybe we should put the scientists in charge. That was a kind of youthful idealism, but he backed away from that once he got to know scientists a bit better. But he did think that if everyone would take an approach akin to the one scientists use in their work, but apply it to politics and to other parts of our lives, we'd all be a hell of a lot better off. One thing we can certainly say is that we sure could use that. And along the same lines, and this has come up, and I noticed that my friend Tom here has a book on propaganda with him, and Aaron mentioned Edward Bernays and the beginnings of his concern with propaganda, and he was, of course, the founder of public relations as an industry. And general semantics coalesces, really comes into being at the same time following World War I that many others become concerned with political propaganda and with understanding and analyzing it. So all this is to say that talking about politics and political language, the use of language and the use of symbols in politics is very much a concern for those of us in general semantics and for all of us as citizens. And so we're pleased to have this session, which is called Political Talk and Political Drama, to make the link to the players as well, Election 2018. And I would note that when we started up this new round of sessions in 2016, that was the title of our the first program that I organized. So it seemed like the right time to return to that topic. I'll just read a little preamble. American politics over the past several years has proven to be highly eventful and highly controversial, rendering the upcoming midterm elections highly consequential. Just note, we're a month away. Most times people don't care that much about midterms. This time, quite different. The role of language and the use of misuse of symbolism in politics, along with their relation to facts and political realities, have long been a concern for general semantics. And as I mentioned, having organized a number of sessions on this topic, and starting in 2016 with that in relation to that election, we're pleased to begin our Fall 28 programming with a panel discussion that will explore current American political discourse, little more with a month to go before the midterms that will decide the composition of the U.S. Congress in the coming year. And let me introduce our panelists, who are conveniently lined up in alphabetical order. On my far left, your right, Arshia Anwer is an assistant professor of communication at Manhattan College in the Bronx. And her research interests are in the areas of integrated marketing communication, the philosophy of communication, religious communication, and intercultural communication. She has her Ph.D. in Rhetoric and an M.A. in integrated marketing communication from Duquesne University. That's in Pittsburgh for you New Yorkers. Yeah, we know you, the Duquesne people. And she has an M.A. in psychology from Osmania University in Hyderabad, India. She's worked in the communication and education fields in a variety of marketing, communication, editing, and teaching roles. And actually, they're not in alphabetical order. Never mind about that part. So, to her right, my colleague at Fordham University, Arthur Hayes. He's the author of the book Press Critics Are the Fifth Estate, Media Watchdogs in America, and Sympathy for the Cyberbully, How the Crusade to Censor Hostile and Offensive Online Speech Abuses Freedom of Expression. And he's the editor of, this is coming out already? It's out now. Communication in the Age of Trump, which he insists is not an oxymoron. And to Arthur's right and my immediate left, Tom Gencarelli is a professor and a chair of the communication department at Manhattan College in the Bronx. We're all from the Bronx, isn't it? And a member of the Board of Trustees of the Institute of General Semantics, the Board of Directors of the New York Society for General Semantics. And now that the new issue of Etc. is out, you are officially the editor of, is now the new editor of Etc., a review of General Semantics. Journal for many years and did a great job, and now Tom's taking over and he's going to show him up. So, I do want to ask, I mean, this is obviously a topic that people have strong feelings about, sometimes very passionate feelings, and all of that, but I do want to ask that out of respect for our panelists and for our format, that you hold your questions and comments until later on, when we will open up to questions and comments, so we can have a good discussion preceding that. I always wanted to do something like the McLaughlin report, just say, you know, ask the question, say, wrong! But we'll try to, and I don't know, everyone doesn't get that. What? Yeah, so let's not go there. That's not good anymore. Okay, so we'll get started. I want to note that a couple of weeks ago, Arthur stopped by my office and said, well, what are we going to talk about? And I said, I don't know, something will come up. And, you know, it just seems like the landscape changes from day to day, or certainly from week to week. Do you want to start with the latest and get into the Kavanaugh controversy, or you okay with that? Yeah. Tom, since you're familiar, you're an old hand here. Do you want to start things off?
Yeah, I
Just go down the row.
I had actually prepared remarks thinking that we were going to.
Oh, we did. So you want to read them?
Well, I did right.
Okay, Tom has remarks. Go ahead.
And we'll use that as a segue.
Okay, sure.
Tweets of the week.
All right. Yeah, I did. Right. Actually, I wrote this because.
We can't hear anybody down here.
Everybody talk that loudly. You can't hear me.
We cannot hear you.
You need to move up. No, I'm sorry. I can't talk any louder than this.
Well, that's louder than when you started.
There's seats up front here too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's seats up front. Sure.
So,
No microphone,
Go ahead.
but seats up front.
do you want me to stand up?
Continue.
Do it the old fashioned.
I'll try to preserve.
We're in the Players Club.
So I wrote, I can't believe I'm talking this loudly. I actually wrote this because we're going to be doing another panel sort of like this at the New York State Communication Association Conference, which is taking place next weekend. This is the IGS. So I wanted to start putting together my remarks for that, and I got started writing. And so give me about 5 or 6 minutes just to start. So in back in 1998, it's 20 years ago, my gosh, James Carey gave a keynote address to the New York State Education Association conference, and it was entitled, "Where Do We Go with Marshall McLuhan?" NISCA holds their conferences, I just said a moment ago, at this time of the year, typically in the Catskills, right? So just in time for all of us to take a nice drive and see the fall foliage. Jim gave his talk at a conference that was held at the now defunct and once grand name of the Catskills, the Kutcher's Hotel and Conference Center. The coordinator of the conference, NISCA's first vice president at the time, was none other than Lance Strait. Right, you can't ask questions, but you can talk. Yeah. Lance's other keynote speaker during that conference was Langdon Winner from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, whose Q&A was memorably interrupted by a polka band that started playing in the room next door to our dining room. But what's most memorable about Jim's keynote are two things. And the first, do I really have to talk this loud?
Yes,
At least.
Okay, all right. What was memorable were two things. The first is that he pretty much gave an entire 45-minute address off the back of a napkin. And it was a tour de force. If you never had the chance to see or hear Jim speak, he was just a masterful orator. And his talk was part reminiscence about the time that Marshall was alive and at the peak of his contributions and his reputation. It was part about the era itself, right, the 60s. And it was part intellectual history from a guy who remains one of the towering intellectual figures in communication and media studies with an absolute command of the literature that I've only seen elsewise in this guy. The second most memorable thing about Jim's talk, and this is what we're here to talk about tonight, is what he really said in the "Where Do We Go" of his title. Because his talk was about the social, cultural, and political tumult of the 1960s, and Marshall's aloofness with respect to this tumult, his refusal to engage in and to take a stance about the politics of the time. Now again, if you know Marshall's work, you know that he always fancied himself as somebody who offered an unimpassioned position on those things that he observed and about which he commented and projected his thoughts. He did not mean to pass judgment. But two questions arise out of this. The first is, what is the role, what is the responsibility of a public intellectual in responding to the currents of the times? And the second is, what is the role of any intellectual when such commentary falls outside of the bounds of his or her expertise? I make no claim, of course, to being a public intellectual, although as a student of Neil Postman, I've always felt that I'm cut more from that brand of cloth than I am from the idea that what I do is about the narrowness of expertise. But I am, too, a student and a scholar of communication and media studies. And so the question I ask myself is, what do I know about politics? But really, well, I'm sorry, the question, that's not the question I ask myself. The question I ask myself is, what is my place in speaking and writing about politics? What value does my contribution provide when I step up to address the subject of politics in a public forum as a student of media and communication? You know, of course, this question is really about the very nature of technical expertise in modern life. You know, whether we see ourselves and others as technocrats, whether who and what we find worth listening to is a matter of technocracy, or to use Neil's term, technopoly. But it's at this moment in the history of the world, and you know, has it ever been any different, that it's imperative to ask, how can one possibly stand on the sidelines? Politics in a democratic society is a mandate that we engage. In the history of power relationships on the planet, across history and among human beings, it's a gift of which we must all take advantage. There's simply too much at stake. And you know, we're all created equal, right? In the words of Bob Dylan, winner of last year's Nobel Prize in Literature, even the President of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked.
Please.
Oh, no.
I'm not supposed to talk.
I'm sorry, the image.
Sorry. I hate to the picture, I'm trying to get rid
There's no way you can keep quiet with that.
Get pumped down.
We are all created equal.
Some of us are not criminals.
I'm sorry, that sounded like Orwell and Animal Farm.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
And so talk about these things we must, and I must. And in talking, to paraphrase Stanley Fish, we're not only trying to do something, we are doing something. We're doing something important. As I've written and argued a number of times in the past, why we in the humanities and social sciences, why do we do scholarship in the first place, right? It is to help. It is to make things better. It is to make the world a better place. And if this is not before all else our mission and our purpose, then what is? And so let me begin to do my part with respect to these proceedings tonight in the few more minutes left of this introduction. And let me begin from what I know. One way to tell the story of the scholarly discipline, that is the study of our media of mass communication at least, is to begin in the years after World War I in the US and with the study of wartime propaganda. The US and its allies were both victimized by propaganda, but also created propaganda as part of their own war efforts. As Melvin DeFleur and Sandra Ball-Rokeach wrote, and I quote, "As each country became politically committed to the war, there arose a most critical and urgent need to forge stronger links between the individual and society. It became essential to mobilize sentiments and loyalties, to instill in citizens a hatred and fear of the enemy, to maintain their morale in the face of privation, and to capture their energies into an effective contribution to their nation." To this, I would add that the propaganda machine, the development of both propaganda practice and theory, also sought to win over the citizens of enemy nations by attempting to persuade them against their leaders and to rally them to your cause, to our cause. To again quote Dylan, for such reasons as the fact that we have God on our side. Now, these roots of mass comm theory originally led to a somewhat absurdly simplistic and long discredited construct that's known as the magic bullet theory, right? That a message could be fired into your mind and consciousness, and that if it were properly, carefully constructed in the first place, it would have the same consequence, the same result on us all. But it's also important to note that the early study of propaganda in the US was complicit in the idea that we needed to study propaganda so that our citizens, and thus our very system, would not be susceptible to its seductions, so that we and our initiatives, our objectives, would not be victimized by propaganda. We didn't study it to understand or to do anything about the ways in which our own nation propaganda to support its ends, to support how those in power choose to develop and maintain, and use it, to maintain and to increase and to amass power. This is an interesting kind of conundrum because on the one hand we want to help citizens recognize propaganda for what it is when produced by our enemies, but not so much to be aware of it as propaganda when we use it ourselves. Well, in the meantime, the study of propaganda led to this book and led me early in my career to read it. Jacques Ellul's Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes. Sorry about the sexism of the title. It was middle of the 60s. Yeah, that's right, thanks. The gist of this book can perhaps be summed up in this one sentence, that in a mass-mediated world, everything is propaganda. Or, as Marshall McLuhan writes in his blurb on the back of my vintage book's paperback, the theme is that when our new technology encompasses any culture or society, the result is propaganda. Let me just take two quotes, and I'll sum up and finish here and finally get to my point. In line with another book from the same time, Daniel Borston's book, The Image, where Borston points to the ways in which the new television culture of the moving image had begun to lead us down the road toward post-literacy. DeLue writes, and I quote, "Modern man does not think about current problems. He feels them." 3 pages after that, he writes, "The more intense the life of a group to which an individual belongs, the more active and effective propaganda is." These 2 quotes, along with the rest of DeLue's analysis, speak to our present moment. The coining fake news speaks to nothing new here. Rather, the question becomes, can journalists do their job? And the journalistic enterprise, founded in the need in a democratic society to report to citizens about their government, their governance and politics, can this ever uncover and report on the truth when media bias is not about the simplistic either-or groups of our current political civil war? Media bias is about the fact that everything is biased. Everything is political and susceptible to claims about its disingenuousness because of the politics involved. In addition, mainstream traditional media are branches and subsidiaries of major corporations whose captains of consciousness, to borrow from Stuart Ewan's title, in the corporate suites and in the corner offices, whose major shareholders and whose off-the-record partners in the gathering and leaking of news. All of these folks are connected to power and its machinations. But if we cannot count on them, if we cannot count on this institution that we have built for this purpose, then where can we go, where do we go to know and to seek the truth? What alternative do we have? We're not going to answer.
Thank you, Tom. Arthur, do you want to chime in on this?
All right, sure. The response from the mainstream legacy media has been, I guess, categorized in two major responses. There was 2016, 2017, sort of a wringing of hands about how to deal with a president who lies about things both big and small. They've got into this trap because mainstream legacy media believes in something called objectivity. It is not the objectivity that scholars practice adhere to, it's related to it. But the odd thing, it's a response to the 1890s in yellow journalism and the fake news of that period. Got us into debating Cuba and those type of things, right? Made up stories. So, 2 things, fact-checking and how do you deal with a president who lies? Everything. I'm always amazed. The most innocuous thing is never straightforward. So, give you an example. The Wall Street Journal, where I did work for 5 years, I was telling someone about objectivity earlier. I do not think for a second I share the political views of the Wall Street Journal. But I was able to work as a journalist because I followed a discipline of objectivity there. I still have some issues, but this traditional form of objectivity that the mainstream legacy media had practiced said the following. You could not say that president or anyone lied if you did not know their intentions. Which puts I cannot tell you, I'll just say, about a year ago, I was on a panel discussion with former colleagues who are now at a news service, which I won't name, but I think is Dutch-based. Anyway, and this was a discussion that came up, this international news service. They will not say the president lied about this thing. Because that, they say, well, if we do this, then we'll have to say that the dictator in this other country which we cover, he's lying. Yeah, so what's wrong with that? Well, we won't have access. So that's sort of the problem with that approach. There's a bunch of confidentiality, so I can't get into details. But so we have, now you see New York Times, they went through this thing that, I guess Quat, I guess his name is, now who's the head editor, they made a statement, they will say that that's a false statement. It will be in the lead or in the headline. So you see that more and more in the major publications. So that's how the mainstream media is dealing with this in one way. The other effort has been the fact-checking efforts, which have grown tremendously in the last couple of years. Started in the 1990s, PolyFact, for example. But now you will see, if you read their Times, second or third page, they have the stories that they fact-checked the day before. But if you go to any of these online fact-checking services, they will. So this is their approach to this. The problem, as one of my colleagues wrote in the a chapter of Duff Noble about fact-checking, is that does fact-checking really work? Well, the preliminary is it doesn't. It only works for those people who are open-minded. It will not really have an impact on those 36% people who believe Trump can do no wrong, even as he paraphrases, shoots someone in Times Square, right?
Fifth Avenue.
So there is, that effort. So this fact-checking effort, though they're trying to combat what they believe is propagandas and misinformation, it's difficult to say it will have the impact that they hope it would, because it requires the recipient to be someone who's open-minded. So those are the two ways legacy journalism has. Now, if you're in, as I tell my students, at the same time, there's always been, we're all up to here, most of them, the alternative press. All right, so there's always been advocacy journalism. There's always been a left-wing publication or something like that, where they did not follow this particular path of what's called narrow objective journalism. Now, they still were able to tell you with great transparency who their sources were. Right? You can make a judgment as to is this story credible? Is this account credible? For instance, the New York Times story this morning about Trump and how he actually made the money, you see how well it's sourced, and it gives you some reason to believe that it's credible. So these are the typical response to what we see now as a president who, and obviously all presidents lie and engage in propaganda. Some they would think would be innocuous. I teach a film class, and I was always surprised that one of my favorite movies was a propaganda vehicle, Casablanca. Mm-hmm. It can't be. How can this be, right? So, but then it's obvious once you realize that, what the message was, what they were trying to get Americans to support the war in Europe. And so you have Rick, the cynical Rick, now becomes at the end, this is the beautiful French that walks out into the desert, and leaves, what's his name, back. Never happened, right? He'd take her and go home himself. But anyway, so there's always that kind of propaganda, but I always want to point, the problem with propaganda is that it doesn't appeal to the rational side of us. Right? It appeals to our emotions, to our insecurities, think commercials, right? And that's when, and then that's, I'll segue into Trump again and what we saw this last week. I'm a lawyer. We saw a candidate, a nominee for the Supreme Court, violate something that was sacrosanct, basically you're in law school. A certain judicial temperament, showing anger. Right? And the words he used to show this anger, even a threat right at the end. I'm gonna get all you, right, when I get on the go. All right, so, and anger is an effective tool because it deals with emotion and it's always been a propaganda tool. And Trump, of course, uses it quite well. The legacy mass media cable news shows totally nuts. Well, they're angry. That's why they're voting with Trump. What does that mean? They're angry. But also, why is it legitimate to appeal based on a mere fact that someone is angry about something? Right? But that's his appeal about this anger. And so it works quite effectively for those people who believe they should be angry about something. And of course, as we all know, billionaires are always angry. Throughout the history of the world, rich people are always angry. I never quite got that. I know why they are, but it's an odd concept that they're always angry at the rest of the world. Someone's going to come and take my castle and all my land, right? Even though I took it from killing other people. And so, taxation. That one, and then the other thing I want to bring up is vulgarity, which Trump used. I'm a New Yorker, raised in the Bronx, not an innocent, but I almost fell off my chair when I heard Giuliani say about Cohen, he's a scum.
Yeah.
What? So it's one thing if my peers from the Bronx, South Bronx like that, talk that way, but I was told that the elite, well-trained and educated, didn't speak this way. Now it's okay, it seems, because it's effective, to use profanity. Now it works a great deal because it's a double-edged sword. But it certainly works for like, because why? Because typically your receptive audience believes that you're authentic. You're talking like the guys in the, right? The guys in the street who are, you pointy-headed liberals, and those in the 60s, you know who pointy liberals were, right? You eloquent speakers from Yale and so like that. But we know it really, so, right? Profanity works. But it's something of a shock, and I'm sort of surprised that it didn't just revolting to most people who, for someone who was the first one in their family to go to a college degree, it was odd that most of those people in America didn't think that this was just beyond the pale, that a president can say, what did he say to them? They can, those, right? I think one rally a couple of times, or the other one, blank holes, all right? Even though that wasn't public, right? It was in a meeting. Yes, all presidents we know swear like sailors, Richard Nixon in private. But what has changed? Possibly this is consistent with the overall coarsening of our culture and has an appeal. Right, so, I was telling someone earlier, I'm not opposed to profanity, but we know there are movies where it's gratuitous. And it appeals to the 13-year-old boy. But should our politicians use this to lower the level of discourse? I'm not against a person using profanity here and there. I don't believe they should be excluded from the public sphere because they're not as eloquent as, say, as Obama. However, it seems to me that it's troubling and it's, that we have presidents who believe the appeal is to use profanity when those of us who would like to think that who use the written word, particularly, will look at the source. How can I say this in another way, right? The point of being eloquent. So we've lost that apparently. I don't think that's good for democracy. And it also is clearly pretty clear that this appeal to anger is, and use of anger is bad for democracy. We can name a few politicians, right, the fascists in particular, whose appeal was always the anger. Right? Everything was anger. Right? So Hitler, anger. Right? And so, again, these things, when we look at how they use language, the tone of how they speak, I think it's very troubling. for democracy. Having said that, I don't see too many other politicians doing that yet. So maybe this
Lindsey
example.
Graham did it.
Pardon?
Lindsey
Yeah.
Graham, he was on CNN, and he
Oh.
said, you know, if you don't like me working with Trump, I don't care. In fact, he
Lindsey
actually,
Graham?
Lindsey Graham, yeah.
Boy, that's like having the guy you beat up every day. No, but all of a sudden I'll get stuck. No, it's cool. He's quite a milquetoast for him to be. But so, and that's part of one of the. I guess that's a good example. Right? I'm not aware of that. Because what he thinks is effective, which is just against his person, goes against all these years of his personality. So apparently I'm wrong that it is affecting the public the discourse among people who we thought were beyond that, at least publicly, would not talk that way. So there's a lot of other things that, in terms of Trump and his age, in this particular age, which raises questions about semantics. Just quickly, the mediation, this blurring of entertainment, and Trump's use of that, The Apprentice, like that, and what again in the text in the book that I edited, chat about actually asked students about this. And yeah, there are people voting because they think that they're getting the guy who they saw on The Apprentice. Of course, the other thing is the fake news and how he is Orwellian has changed the meaning of that in his purpose.
Thank you. Now, just about that last point, right? The celebrity image is not the person, the map is not the territory from general semantics. But let's hear from Arshia now.
Right, so the two things that I kind of was drawn to when Tom and Naka were talking, the first is the fact that specifically with propaganda and what Tom talked about in terms of the wartime effort and those kind of things, it's very important to, in terms of propaganda, divide people in terms of the us versus them, right? So that's the kind of rhetoric that, especially in the time of war, and that's coming to us from Bernays and from all of these people, which again, at this point of time is being used by this Trump administration. When we think of everybody who has been, tarred in terms of them, right? So Mexicans, Muslims, you name it, and that's it, right? So that understanding, especially when it comes to the idea of immigrants or foreign workers, refugees, all of these ideas who are not American in the eyes of what is going on politically is one of the things. And historically, that's in terms of presidential remarks, that has been the case. There have been clear distinctions between immigrant versus American. When we think about the Japanese, the Irish, again, you name it and you have it. So that's one of the things that I was kind of, coming to when we thought of this particular, the symbols being used specifically in terms of dividing the people for power and political gain. The second thing specifically that is coming into play with Arthur's remarks that I thought about is one of the things that was mentioned is that anger is one of the ways that emotionally it is used to emotionally mobilize people. And I would think that considering immigration and these kind of ideas, what has also been used very effectively, if not very ethically, is fear. So that is, again, another emotion that specifically in today's discourse is finding, a place in what we are hearing from people. Again, it's people who are not us who have to be feared. because they are going to rapists, killers, etc. in terms of Mexicans, or thinking about it economically, they are going to come take our jobs, and so on and so forth. And there's multiple ways to kind of work with the idea of fear. That's what happened with specific policies that have come out from the Trump administration, right from thinking about the Muslim travel ban that was enacted in January 2017, the border wall issue that has been going on, economic issues like the NAFTA stuff and America First, and all those issues are again a result of the same rhetoric that is kind of going on in the public sphere at this point of time. Now, just those are the two jumping off points that I kind of thought were worth mentioning while listening to you. Specifically, I'm talking about, and I'm framing this in understanding immigration or foreign worker issues in today's talk that I have. And I am from India. I have been in the United States for 10 years, and I am working at Manhattan College right now on an H-1B visa. So I am the them that is being referred to in this political rhetoric in every which way. So that is where this talk is coming from in terms of my personal connection, and in terms of how not just stuff that is spoken out loud in rallies and that is getting people to mobilize is working against people, but also how policies and policy change that is behind the scene in terms of the governmental machinery is working against people, right? So again, specifically the stuff that I am thinking about in relation to this talk is H-1B visas, which is currently what I am on and working through. After President Trump won the election, well, before that as well, he has been talking about the idea of immigration and foreign workers and how that can be curtailed, again framed in the them versus us and the economic issues and all of those ideas. After coming into office, there are multiple policies that have been put into place that are working from different ways against this particular issue. So again, it's not just about what people are saying, it's also the behind the scenes policies that are affecting the way that these symbols and signs are operating in telling people who is them and who is us, in a way. So a few things that I kind of looked at in terms of this particular H-1B visa process is that generally the approvals for the visas for H-1B are in severe decline. They're after the presidential executive order that was signed on April 18, 2017, which has been termed the Buy American and Hire American executive order. Again, by signaling Buy American and Hire American, you are excluding certain things from giving it value, in a sense. The second thing that I am looking at within this H-1B visa issue is the idea that when H-1B visa holders are applying for renewal of visas and they are being rejected, that's moving to deportation, which was not the case historically. So again, this is signaling to people about the worth of their work, the value of what they bring as immigrants, as foreign workers to a country, which multiple studies have shown that there is value and there is worth to what immigrants bring, whether they are going to reach for citizenship or just working in a place. So that's, again, signaling in a particular way to these people in terms of us versus them. And the third idea that is specifically happening within this area is that H-1B spouses are not being allowed to work, which is, again, historically not been the case. And there are multiple ways that their employment is being curtailed. Again, that presents problems for these families, and again, it's signaling to these people that, you know, they are not worth spending time, money, effort, and so on. So this is generally, you know, in kind of concluding or kind of bringing it back together, the policies from the current administration are intensifying the debate about national identity, right? So what does it mean to be American? Who is us versus the them? It is intensifying debate about economic issues and economic policies, economic growth as well, right? So who is to contribute towards the growth of a nation? Is it just the us, or can it be a global contribution, and so on? It has elements of worker fairness that are kind of also thinking about. And in the larger sense, it is about what are considered American values, and how do we define American values in today's day and time. And that is a lot of what this rhetoric that is coming to us from the administration is signaling and talking to us about.
Us versus them propaganda, one of the techniques that Trump has used in scholars is called dog whistle politics. Right? And so he's done that a great deal. I think the word he used last month, 2 months ago, maybe it's a little longer. So the Mexican immigrants were, well, I can't remember the term, but it basically was like, the illusion was that they were insects, that they were infestation coming into America. I forgot what term he used that was noted. That, well, why did you choose that word, right? So, and we've seen this, unfortunately, right? We do see a human being like insects coming into invading our country. We've seen it before throughout history. And so the dog whistle politics is another one of those things.
Vermin, maybe?
Vermin? Vermin, that's it, right. I think he said vermin, right. So, I don't have to go into specifics about who's used those terms before and against what ethnic groups, all right, throughout history. So it should be, so we should shudder when we hear a president refer to an ethnic group as vermin, given what we know how this has been used in the past. His dog whistle politics with regards to the quarterback for San Francisco, and that they shouldn't kneel. I forgot exactly his phrase, but therefore he's changed it to be not that they're kneeling in protest, but they're kneeling because they are against the American flag. That was in his State of the Union address, which is of course not factual. True. Of course, it's an attack against a group that he thinks should be grateful, like so Laura Ingram's argument was that the black athletes should just shut up. A dog whistle implies you should be grateful that you're even here making this kind of money. Right, so just shut up and play. Right, so we've seen this kind of, we now call dog whistle, but there's basically ethnic messages where that particular group knows what he's saying. So his hardcore right-wing and his neo-Nazis and other like that. Yeah, well, he's talking to us. Most people don't, and I can't say most people, a lot of people don't pick up on it, that he's using these terms, but it's certainly part of the propaganda, the dogma. He's not the first. Reagan did this a great deal, right? Willie Horton, the first Bush, right? I don't know if you remember the Willie Horton campaign, right? So it's been used before. That's a not too subtle dog whistle.
Well, perhaps for some who didn't remember, this was George H.W. Bush ran an ad about Willie Horton, an African-American convict who was released. It was like an early release program in Massachusetts under his opponent, Michael Dukakis, was governor under his program, and he went out and raped and killed a woman. Right? It was never mentioned that Willie Horton was African American, but his picture, his image, was featured very prominently, and so that was, considered that kind of
And
use.
we know, Alwood, I believe it was, who's passed away. The person who was responsible for the ad who worked for Bush, who's passed away, he later apologized and acknowledged what the intent was of that particular ad. Yes, right. So we know what the intent was. We don't have to even guess at it. But at the time, it was sending a certain message to a constituency of the Republicans that were trying to get ever since 1964, which is the white Southerners who used to be Democrats. Right? And then when they seated a black delegates from the South, the Democratic Convention in '64, many white Democrats left from the South and became part of the Republican Party, and it's been the strategy of the Republican Party ever since to appeal to that particular thing. So if you don't, for those who are not in this country, Republicans used to be Northeast, right? Northeast industrialists, right?
Midwest.
They used to be Midwest too, and they used to be, especially when my teenage years, we had Rockefeller, right, as governor. They were liberals.
Right.
Mayor Lindsay.
Rich liberals.
He didn't do so good with the snow in Queens, but Mayor Lindsay, liberal. Right. So that's a dead species of Republican now. But my point is that that's part of their campaign rhetoric. Trump has just ratcheted it up. That sort of dog whistle propaganda that pits us against those other people.
Now, I do want to note that, again, to connect it to general semantics, that we talk about semantic reactions, the reaction that dog whistles are trying to elicit in folks, and to try to get people to not react in that way, but rather to be critical and reflective.
And I think the delay, isn't it? The delay.
Yeah, absolutely. Delayed
We're talking
reaction.
about a larger semantic environment.
Yes.
What is the
Talk loud, Tom.
Sorry, what is the cultural milieu of the time when all of these messages are being sent out, we're being bombarded with them, and it creates an overall environment that this serves as legitimate public and political discourse at this point in time. And everyone who is involved as a citizen is getting sucked into that, whether it's because we're in agreement with what we're hearing or we're in disagreement with what we're hearing.
And do you want to continue on? Should we continue on the question of these significant symbols that are being used in language?
About language in particular. I think the idea that language has been debased, I sort of mentioned in my remarks that folks like us come from a background that is still literate in a post-literate age. and that the kind of thoughtfulness that comes out of modes of thinking that are defined by being able to read books and read extended treatises of ideas and thinking, that shapes a mindset for how we think and how we approach our world and the things that go on in it. And, you know, we have passed through that at this point into an age where, again, you know, I was flipping through propaganda as I was preparing my opening remarks, and I found that quote where, you know, where he says, you know, we feel now. And if you think about the nature of symbol system that is about images, the symbol system of a person who can't necessarily put two sentences together where one follows from the other, or at least, you know, points them to the next one. There's not a train of thought, right? There's not any sense of semblance, of linearity. Speaks to the fact that if we focus on language, and of course, you know, general semantics is so much about our verbal language. I think that this speaks to our position and where we're coming from rather than to what is going on.
So you're going to give up?
It's a difficult fight. I'm talking about myself. I find that even among college students at a highly ranked college, you have illiterate students, right? And that's pervasive. So they can read, but they choose not to read. They choose to read as little as possible. So when I started teaching in the form of 2004 as an ex-journalist and stuff, came from a different culture, particularly working in Manhattan. I worked with an American lawyer magazine, being trained lawyer like that. And so this is a different, it really is a different culture where people, even businessmen, read. And they read in the news. They wanted to know these things. Yeah. To a culture where students, every class I have, they do not know what happened last night. Virtually every class. And so, and I'll ask them specifically, a few things pop up where they actually follow students.
One of Dr. Straight's students. I'm sorry.
Oh, student.
I'm going to ask questions when the time is right. I have many. I'm excited.
She's going to ask questions.
Oh, okay. All right. So that I find highly problematic with regards to democratic participation in civil discourse and just voting. Today I had students, and I sort of lose it when this happens. So this is my communications in the age of Trump course. That's how I'm teaching it, and it was about voting. And I almost lost it because I said, I'm sorry, I don't buy the I'm not going to vote that some people said because it was the lesser of two evils. Right? I don't buy that because as an Afro-American, and most African-Americans, we only had one time there was a candidate who was perceived by most African-Americans as not the lesser of two evils. So, for the most history of when blacks have voted for president, there wasn't somebody they really loved. It was the lesser of two evils. But you still vote. And I said, does voting, voting doesn't matter. I can give you the Marxist analysis of why reforming and voting doesn't matter. I don't buy that. Because tell that to those parents or those the Central American immigrants, the so-called illegal aliens who came here, who still can't find their children. I really doubt if Hillary Clinton and the Democrats would have put some certain policy into place. Voting matters. People in illiterate countries vote more than we do. Voting matters. So yes, but the notion is that if you are well informed and you read, and it seems and newspapers play this key role for the bourgeoisie, the key role in democratic discourse, right, as being this intermediary giving you no news, but you don't read it, you don't follow it. And so this has been 10 years or more of this that I get the vast majority of students like this. They don't vote, they don't follow news. And sometimes he said, journalism.
How to take graduate?
Right? So, we're not supposed to say this, I guess it's professors. It's all, I didn't say this, it's all rosy, it's wonderful. But anyway.
Well, just a couple of things that kind of, I am teaching a public relations class this semester, and the first half of the class, we are just talking about ethics. And obviously, we are talking about political communication in today's day and age. Communication in the age of Trump is a hot topic, obviously. And a lot of stuff that we are talking about in class it's kind of coming together in terms of two subject areas. One is the image by Borstein in terms of what is paid attention to is the stuff that is entertaining rather than what is factual or intellectual and so on and so forth. And the second thing is, and this is happening sadly, the tragedy of what is happening with this current political time is the fact that he who shouts loudest is the person who's heard in the public arena again, right? So people who are voices that are sane and who are, well, are not shouting loudly enough. It's about objective reporting. It's about, the same journalistic practices that served people well in a time that is not now, because this is unprecedented. We have not seen something which is just lie after lie after lie after lie coming, and how much can you fact check? I mean, if your newspaper is going to be bogged down by fact checking and not actually anything else, that becomes, again, problematic. So that's just the conversation that we've been having in terms of how this is playing out in society, specifically when it comes to the political conversation in today's day and age.
Obviously, the four of us are representatives from higher education, right? And automatically, we're branded as a result of that. Automatically, our politics are, I'm going to use the word rather than inferred, understood. And, on social media, I have some friends who I've known for a long time in my life, and Arshia follows me, Lance follows me a little bit too. I'm not all over social media, but one friend in particular.
You talk about the guy on Facebook?
Yeah.
You're always arguing with?
Well, he's always arguing with me. I haven't unfriended this person. I haven't told him to stop, in so many words anyway. He's someone I know from when I was a kid, and there's the conversation that says, oh, you don't want to be in a bubble where you're just, an echo chamber where you're just hearing people talk about the same things you already agree with, and shouldn't we be hearing from outside of that realm, and shouldn't we be talking to people outside of that realm? But this guy in particular, and so many other people, and Siva Vaidhanathan said an interesting thing about this. He said, if we had 1/10 of the influence that the far right thinks we have on young people, boy, the world would be a better place.
Yeah.
Now, whether you agree that that's true or not is not the point. The point is this, that this guy who follows me on Facebook and argues with me all the time, right, thinks that we're indoctrinating young people. I'm trying to get young people to think. I don't care what they think about. I want them to, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm yelling, I'm trying to make sure you hear me in the back of the room, right? I want them to inform their thinking, which means, hey, you've got an array of media before you, you've got experts who, you're studying with in various fields. Inform it, learn about stuff, so that when you think and sit down to write a paper for me, which is an exercise in concentrated, systematic, reasoned thinking, please be able to do that. That you can't do that if you don't read and you don't have models for how to build and construct an argument. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to influence anyone with my politics. I don't care what they think. I want them to think.
Just wanted to get this right. Hannah Arendt, wonderful quote, "There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous."
I was
Which is the medium is the message.
we talking about semantics. I always say this to my students. You said you think about unfriending them. And I just think that's so Orwellian term that they sell it in Facebook. So I asked my students, well, how many, I'm not on Facebook, any social media, but I asked them, well, how many friends do you have? Okay, if they're your friend, are you inviting all those people to your wedding? I guess they're not your friend. I said, if they're your friend, when they ask you for a loan, are you going to give them some? No, I guess they're not your friend. But they have you believing that this is a friend in the concept of way. Now, there's Aristotle approach where there are three different kinds of friends, but categories. But again, this is in this age now. That's all. Well, they are not friends. People are friending you. At least the concept that we all grew up with. And then you just ask. Yes, I have 2,000 friends on Facebook. Come on over next week.
Well, Neil Postman, addressed this, called it the meaning of meaning.
Yes, yes.
And actually his point about community and virtual community, I thought was really right, very incisive, that people talk about finding a community online, which is people who are like-minded, but that in a real community, people have very different points of view, very different needs and interests, and they have to find a way to negotiate with each other to work things out, to survive. That's totally unlike what's meant by online or virtual communities. So we find that, I guess this is, again, the great symbol drain was another one of his quotes, that we just see that are significant symbols, because it's even, we talk about the flag and again from the conservative point of view of disrespecting the flag, but there was a time, and there was a time in the 60s when say hippies and counterculture types wearing a patch on their jeans from a flag was considered highly disrespectful, or in Easy Rider having the flag on the motorcycle helmet. But now, on the right we find American flag beach towels and bikinis and ties and all of this, and that's somehow okay. That's not disrespecting the flag. But again, it's the symbol drain, especially as it's associated with commercialism. The flag in advertising, use, of course, of our, we see Washington and Lincoln turned into kind of silly images to sell cars, right? And then we wonder about, kind of just the decay of all our symbolism. And then, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, which Tim Tebow did in prayer, right? But Kaepernick does it out of protest of people, African Americans getting killed, and that's called disrespecting the flag.
And he's black, and Tim Tebow is white. Can I just go back to the meaning of meaning for a minute?
Sure.
What I use the term, and I think I used this term pretty early on, and I'm seeing it more and more in conversations and across the media, that we're in a civil war. Is it the case that in the past just created a facade, and we were very diplomatic, and hiding behind that diplomacy was the same fight that is this either or, black and white, this or that, you know. And now we just dropped the facade. Or
We did once before.
I don't know if that's the issue so much as, right, is that the issue, or is it that you have someone who is supposed to bring the country together who uses this divisive rhetoric? In other words, yeah, we've always had these things, again, as an African American in the 60s, right? We always said, and for someone who was a Southerner, my parents, we always said, well, I prefer the white Southerner because at least I know who I'm dealing with. So he's racist and the liberal who won't really tell me who he is. Having said that, there's still a benefit in being, like first the Queen or something like the nobility in Britain. And so there is some benefit, at least publicly, behaving a certain way, even though you know that this person doesn't care about that poor person in a certain section of London, right? There is something with that kind of decorum to say something. So things can still get done, right? They still were, right? Because of the civil rights movement and everything. But at least there is a value, I think, to preventing it from all falling apart when your supposed leaders now take sides. And again, so Lincoln truly wanted to keep things together. It's this one side that says, let's break away. And you can always argue, well, maybe it was legitimate that Lincoln should have been tough about this. But again, and I've wrestled with this, but I think that's not the issue. Yes, there's a value in people being candid, but there's also value in people being polite.
Right.
As public figures like that, right? And it goes just along, and that's what we're lost a great deal. Because when we're not polite, we're not respectful of the next person, we can't have the dialogue. And diplomats know this, right? You can't have the dialogue to get to a spot when you already start off with the person's calling you names. Okay, maybe it's different for the head of North Korea. Rocket Man didn't bother him. I don't know if he even knew that. But again, but when Trump called him fat, he seemed to react. I don't know if you picked that up, right? So we're there. Again, so I think there is value in that. So I don't think that's the issue.
And this is the first time that the chief executive, in terms of this idea of us versus them, has castigated the other side of the aisle in blatant and continued ways, right? He's always going to look at and we now use the phrase the Democrat Party. I think that's a kind of an epithet all of a sudden, right? Not the Democratic Party, it's the Democrat Party.
Democrat.
Yeah, well, and you know, again, that's stepping beyond the bounds of what the office was supposed to do.
Changing the connotation and denotation of what that means.
Arshia, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word facade has a little bit of a negative connotation over here in terms of, and I see the value of civil discourse, and I mean, not going into the Levinasian understanding of space and those kind of things over here, but I do think that when we speak and use language with another in terms of a dialogue, that is what keeps us civil, because I think in our heads, our base thoughts are a little bit more self-serving in a way. And the reason I'm saying that the facade might be a problem is because I don't think it's fake in any way. It's just the fact that when we are speaking to another person, the fact that requires us to be polite or civil is not fake. It's not a facade put on, which is why I'm kind of not happy with the word a little bit. So that I think is what I'm.
Or it's as much of a facade as the other form of communication of Yeah, and Edward T. Hall talked about all cultures have three types of communication: formal, informal, and technical.
Right.
And what seems to have withered, and this is not beyond politics, but withered tremendously in American culture, is the formal communication. You know, when I go to a restaurant and the waiter says, you know, "Hi, my name is John, I'll be your waiter," it's like, I don't care what your name is. You know, people used to go, waiter, you know, or sir, miss, right? But, you know, then we had a formal mode of address because, you know, but this is like this attempt at being intimate and informal. When somebody cold calls me or sends me an email and goes, "Hi, Lance, I got a great offer for you," it's like, who are you? But I mean, it's something that has happened throughout our culture, and I think it ties in very much with that earlier point about the coarsening of the language, the willingness, and I admit that I'm part of it too in class. I'm willing to use curse words, and when I started out, I was very reluctant to do that in class. I think The Sopranos had a lot to do with that. But so does a lot else. Maybe we can open up to questions now, since we have you know, a lot of folks you know, who have been. And Carrie, I'd like to welcome Carrie, because you're in from California.
And I'm here from LA. Lance is my college professor for 22 years ago. I started for him. So I was a class of 2000, so thank you. And Dr. Strait actually paved the way for me in many ways. Just a couple of questions. I'm going to do 3. I've narrowed it down in my mind because I have a lot, so I'm going to be really precise. I'm a mom of 5 children, and I'm also a CEO, and I'm an entrepreneur. I know in semantics saying that is actually wrong. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. The function of what do you do? So one of the companies I created is an app that connects over 15 million people every day. But my question is on you guys, because I have, you know, like I said, 5 children, ages 3 to 13, and I hear a lot of resistance, and I get it. I'm the same way. Like, I want to laugh. Like, they don't get it. They don't understand. They're not connected. I'm not. But when you said, I just want them to think, it really landed with me. I almost wanted to go to dinner. And then you said that, and I was like, now I want to stay. So thank you, Professor Tom. Do you understand, because general semantics is my question, general semantics is tied to, for me, neurolinguistic programming, which is like source. I am source of everything in my life. So my question to you as professors, do you understand the privilege that you have, that you've created for yourself, that you deserve to have, and the source that you are? And that if children are not engaged, that's your feedback. Your students are not interested, that's your feedback. So do you understand, and do you take on the mission of what it is to educate? And are you ready to be responsible for that next generation? I get it, what you said. It's not about let's make sure they're all Democrats. Listen, I grew up with Ivanka Trump, and I voted for Hillary, and I cried my eyes out when she didn't win. And the next morning I told my children, Donald Trump is our president, and my son said to me, 7 years old, I heard he's a fucking idiot. And I said, and my husband's from Sweden, so you can imagine, I grew up in a socialist family. No, but you can imagine like what I was dealing with, and I said, and you get to respect him, because he's the president of the United States of America. Now, moving forward, my question is to you, but literally the only time my son ever dropped an F-bomb, he was 7 years old. But my question to you is, do you get the great privilege of being educators? Because Lance Strait absolutely shaped my career and my life. That's why I'm sitting here 22 years later. So like, we're not victims to society. And as professors, we're not victims to that, right? I'm not a professor, so I'm not going to speak as one. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a CEO, and I reach millions of people a day because I created a fucking app. But like, reality is like, sorry, you like the F-bomb. You guys, you are the people that would take my children and their peers to wherever they get to go. So we're not victims. We are source to the future. So my question is, what does that mean? It's not sitting back and saying, these are how kids are today, let's laugh about it. I don't want to laugh about it. I don't find it funny. Like, we are source. So my question again, do you get the great privilege that you've earned as professors and the impact that you can make? Because you have the biggest voice. Because you are directly teaching students that are going to vote in the next election for the next president.
Okay.
And they're not listening to me.
Is that 3 questions?
Okay, that's the one question. You get the source.
Do you want to ask all 3 together? Or?
The source question. It's the source. If I could just say source, then I think we're good. We get the source.
Yeah. I started teaching before I had children. And one of the things I learned from having children is that I stopped. We come, Arshia and I, from a college that was started by the Order of Lasallian Christian Brothers. Why this is important is that Jean-Baptiste de La Salle in 17th century France was the guy who said, education is no longer going to be about tutors teaching individually the children of the nobility and the newly affluent merchant class. We're going to put a person in front of the room with 30 people and make education available to more people in this room. And so I stood in front of a class of 30 people until I had kids, and I looked at them all as their class, and they've all got to do the same thing, and they've got to do their work and do the best they can with it. And then I learned to think of them as individuals, and to really start to try to differentiate the idea of different learning styles and strengths and weaknesses, and what someone is bringing to the class this semester in their life and or not. And so, you know, I'm not going to make a blanket generalization about what I'm doing with these people. Some of them are going to come in, and I say to them, you know, why are you here? Are you here because your parents made you? Because this is what all my friends did after high school? Because this is what I have to do to get a good job? Well, wow, you know, you have 4 years. You don't have to worry about, you know, making a living, putting a roof over your head and food in your mouth, and you're spending a ridiculous amount of money at a prestigious private institution that is being paid for somehow. Maybe you're not paying for it directly right now, but, you know, and, or, you know, so are you here to learn and to come into this world for these 4 years? Or do you want to resist it? Or do you want to say, it's about my world and you got to pander to me, you got to do the Tom show and, you know, entertain me, damn it, right? So, you know, that's my thinking about how I'm a source in that room, because, you know, it's my class that I'm assigned to do.
The way I think about it is, I don't see myself, and maybe I might be understanding you wrong, I don't see myself as the source in the room or the person with privilege, because ultimately my goal in that room is to have those people be sources for themselves and get to a point where they can think for themselves and they can be the people that, my role as I see it in that room is to enable them to reach that place where they can be thoughtful people on their own without the help of anybody else. So I don't quite know if I'm understanding your question correctly or responding to
Exactly
it.
what you just said. You are standing as source so that they can stand as source for themselves. Thank you.
Yes.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's like you're standing as source so they can stand as source for themselves. And you are absolutely source in that place. That's all I was just asking. It's like, do we understand like the great, I go to a lot of parent meetings. You know, I'm the president of PTSA at my school in LA. You know, it's just like, and it's a lot of like throw our hands up. And I'm not blaming. I'm in partnership with the teachers and the educators. You know, I mean, partnership.
If I am a source, I can only be that source if that student is willing to engage himself.
Right.
You said it perfectly well. I always laugh at this thing.
Yeah.
There are these professors who are like gurus, I guess, and they change. I don't have any illusions. I'm not going to change anyone's ideology or thought. I just want to open them up to different ideas, but I also want him to learn how to think in a systematical, critical, rational way. I've advised Republicans. We had, I forgot who won it, Ann Coulter controversy was coming to Fordham. The president of Fordham did not, had his letter that he addressed to the Republicans, young Republicans invited him. And one was in my class. And I basically said, so, well, that's because you acquiesced to the president of the university because you're a Republican. If you were a student like I was here 40 years ago and not a president, you would have told him where to go. You have freedom of speech. I don't care about your ideology. What is Ann Coulter going to do when she comes to the campus? Are we all going to, yes, you're right. Now, what real danger does she pose by coming here to speak? So I said, you should have never acquiesced to what the president said. And if you quote me on this, I'll deny it. No, but anyway, so again, so my example is that it wasn't about whether you're Republicans or not. It was about, I'm building you up as a person who can be part of our society, a person who can think on their own, who can make rational choices. But I have no illusions. I have no illusions about some persuasive power to mold somebody into something else if they don't want to be.
So second question,
Well,
how
let me
does
just,
Donald Trump become
let me
president?
just say that one. The privilege is getting to spend some time with these marvelous young people. I was teaching, I got a few here from the class on general semantics I'm doing. They're waving. And I was teaching that class during the election, and we actually met the day after the election. And they were distraught. And I was saying, it won't be so bad. We got through Nixon, we got through Reagan, we'll get through this. And they were talking about how they were going to go, after class, they were going to go protest in front of Trump Tower. They give me hope. And I think if I were doing some other kind of job, just working in an office or something, I wouldn't have that privilege. So I do feel privileged in that respect. But you have two more questions.
No, I only had a second. The second part of my
Okay.
question was, so how, this is like a rhetorical, for the room. So in taking into consideration general semantics and how you said, you can't support your rhetoric to influence others to make decisions, how do you then believe that Donald Trump became president? It's such an open, ridiculous question. Yeah, Donald Trump became president. So he utilized his rhetoric and he influenced.
He went to electoral college. He was like 2 million short in the popular vote. He appealed to our lesser angels. That's always going to get you a sizable amount of voters when you just appeal to the worst part of human nature. There is clearly a substantial segment of America who agrees with him. He was, again, able to both get those people who don't necessarily agree with him in the elite in the Republican Party, right? As we see with Congress and the Senate, who are just, I'm going to get my tax break, so I don't care about the rest of the things. And you see how, even Bush, how he insulted the whole family, they just sort of be quiet and acquiesce to it because they're getting their tax breaks and so and so. So that's how he won. He won because also you had as a candidate, Hillary Clinton, who came with baggage, right? Who came with baggage. Part of it in terms of communication is that this has been documented. He got incredible amount of television coverage.
He had money.
Because he was an entertainer.
Right.
So the cable shows would put like a half an hour, we've never seen this before, of his rallies of a candidate president. Because, it was like, we've all seen the car wreck where you're in traffic and you wonder why you're half an hour in traffic and you realize everybody was just looking at the accident on the other lanes, right? So everyone wanted to watch this possible car wreck.
It's
Right,
a
I was gonna
morbid
say.
curiosity.
So Moonves of CBS,
Yeah.
only CBS said,
Oh, I was so
he
mad
said,
when he said this.
right, it was great for he was great for CBS in terms of ratings, but bad for the country.
I don't remember the second part.
Okay.
I only remember him saying he's great for CBS.
Yes, but he did say that.
No, he acknowledged it
Right,
was
because I've been
bad.
teaching it. Right,
Okay.
so that's how he won.
Yeah,
So third
maybe-
part, I said third, so I'm gonna do third, then I'm gonna shut up and I'm not gonna speak the rest of the night. So taking into consideration what we all know of general semantics, of source, of neurolinguistic programming, right? Of Facebook that we made fun of. What's gonna be different in the future? Like, how can we all stand as source in this moment right now, taking into consideration and exercising all of our great privileges as, entrepreneurs and professors influencing thousands, because it's probably millions, because the kids you speak to, some of them have 1 million followers on Facebook or something, right, or on Instagram, whatever. But like, what's the future look like then? So we've acknowledged, that we are source, what went wrong, but what he did right, what Trump did right is scary. So how do we take that into consideration, utilizing the positive knowledge that we have and general semantics to like create a different future? Not like fluffy, like what's gonna happen tomorrow? Is that the point of tonight, or am I making up a new point?
All I can teach you can do is educate them. Propaganda, disinformation, misuse of language.
Yeah.
That's all we can do.
I have a student who has her hand up.
So, going with educating your students, I guess this presentation was wonderful. One thing that did catch my eye is the criticism of students not being educated on daily events. And as someone who doesn't live in a generation with, like a paper boy every day, like my mom grew up, like I know that every single day she got a paper saying every single thing that happened every day. And as someone that's taking almost 20 credit hours and has so much on my plate, it's like I identify with someone that doesn't know what's going on every second of the day. And I come into class and I might not know a certain event and I might not know exactly what's going on with it. And so I do feel bad, but I was wondering your advice and almost your sympathy with those students that may not keep up on the daily and may not be able to do that, and maybe your advice on how to do that even though there might not be the same resources that you guys grew up with, because I know that though they may be online, there's definitely not
Do you watch television?
No, I don't.
That's a problem for you.
I don't have a
half-hour
TV.
television. You have to get
I'm a science major. I don't watch TV.
There's not a lot of
You're a
time.
science major, you have to watch
I
TV.
can understand that. There's not a lot of time throughout the day for us students to
But your face
get
is in this
in touch on
machine every day. Do not look at the machine and watch two minutes of
Okay, Rob,
television.
thank you.
I'm a communications
I guess I'm just
major.
asking you guys your advice on how to get updated, even though I'm not necessarily.
There's an app for that.
I'm a communications major and I should be up on my current events and political news. And I find myself watching political arguments because they're on television, on the news, because my mom has it on or my grandparents have it on, and I don't have a stance on where I would place myself. I know I'm against Trump, but I'd like to be more educated on it, and it's difficult because when you're taking as many credits as Bridget has said, it's you find yourself always in the library doing work and not having time to look up on the current events. So while I can understand that we should watch television, we don't necessarily have the time because we're too focused on our academics and wanting to better ourselves for our future, but we should be up on current events.
Added to I have 4 answers.
Oh, God. I have one. Can I go first?
All right, go first.
Push notifications. That's it.
That was so easy.
Seriously.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, 'cause you could do that
Push
in CNN.
notifications.
Literally on your phone.
You have to have a mobile phone.
When you're walking, I mean, you are
smartphone,
using your
and
phone
internet.
100 times a day. For 50 of those 100 times, put it for educating yourself rather than texting your friend or looking at what Kardashian is doing or be black, etc. and so on and so
So it
forth.
takes time away
I mean,
from-
I'm a millennial. I am on every kind of social media. I have a full workload. I am coming from the same situation, and again, I understand. I have not read an actual physical newspaper in more than 20 years.
What?
I mean, online. I have read it online, of course, but I have not actually picked up a physical newspaper in more than 20 years. I have not. I have not. But that is the way of the future, and if that is how you get your information, and that is where you need to go and find it. It doesn't have to be the paper boy dropping something on your porch every morning. And no, you're not feeling it? Sorry?
What app?
What app?
CNN.
Yeah, whichever is your app of choice. It doesn't matter.
The New Yorker.
But sorry, that went more than one.
No, that's okay.
response.
It was really good that it was just 2 words in the beginning, but I would have followed. All right, so first of all, if you are taking 20 credits and you're really spending all of the time you just said doing your work, God bless you, right? Because that's what you should be doing. That is what this 4 years is about, and hopefully at the end of 4 years you'll be done with it. Right. Second, I have taught for a chunk of my career television and video productions, right? It's part of what my background. I walked into an intro to mass communication class in the spring of 2016, and I couldn't believe I heard the words come out of my mouth, but I'm going to go completely against what Robin was just saying to you. And I said to my students, please do not watch television news for purposes of informing yourself. Watch it for the purpose of analyzing what television news is and what it does.
Right.
Find another source for news, please. Okay? And I don't know how that drifts over into CNN.com, which someone just mentioned as a source for push notifications. Third, I think that when you say I just don't have time, that there might be a part of that that is about really where your values are at now with respect to what you need to make time for, right? When you're a student and probably you're working to make some money so that you have some pocket money to spend, right? Or maybe you have a full-time job to boot, which I've had in my background with public education students. And you've got a social life, and maybe, I don't know, you're an athlete, and all these things, and you're trying to balance them. But if this is important to you, you'll find some time for it. But the last thing is this. Will you, when you're done, when you don't have us educators to tell you what you should be doing and pushing you around, and will you educate yourselves for the rest of your life? Because that's the whole idea of this, that when you're done with your 4 years, it's up to you now. You don't have school anymore. It's not this institutional thing, and you go to classes, but you will have to spend the rest of your life informing and educating yourselves. So if you can do that when you get out of here, then don't worry about it.
We have a question in the back.
There's a very old-fashioned instrument called the radio. And NPR does a wonderful job of informing us. Please engage. You can put it on your phone, take it any place, brush your teeth, listen, make your coffee, listen. There's a lot of information to share.
Just more so like a comment on what you said about how Trump appealed to the minority of the Republican Party in terms of how he addressed and like communicated that like resonated with them and gained their votes. I actually agree with that. A lot of the people that I surround myself with and going to Fordham or going to a higher institution all typically are not well-rounded in their viewpoints or political ideas, and they don't think outside the box. It's just more so what they're taught or what they hear on the news from what he says in his speeches, and I just found that very interesting.
responses. All right, so it has to be your habit to put these things in. Give an example. So if let's see, I have a 10 o'clock class. I'm up at 6 o'clock. I get the New York Times delivered. I go online and read the Washington Post. It's the front page, right? I turn on the cable news shows. I go from MSNBC to CNN, never Fox. All right. I sometimes go to local news. I get a kick out of seeing Channel 2 local news. There's something about that, their little approach there, right? It's different. All right. I'm very old school print oriented my whole life. So I really had this thing about using radio and television. I never wanted to be in television, right? All right. So, but after that, I'm either working on administrative stuff or school things, or writing a book, or trying to write a paper. I go home. I now am doing more school things. When I go to, I'm watching more cable all night long, the cable news. Before I go to bed, I have Jano's textbook on history of art, which I read years ago. I have that beside of my bed. I read that still. I go switching things in that. And I just picked up, I guess, Garrow's biography on Obama. And I'm reading that, and I'm reading that before I go to bed. So it's about will you find the time to do those things? You have to cut those things out. If you tell me you don't watch television news, college students haven't watched television news in large number for decades. I understand partying and everything out there. So I get that. You're not going to be home still watching the news, but as he said, that's one of the worst places to get information. You have to get in magazines. I'm always a big magazine writer. But you have to read magazines, you have to read books. Just getting it from the New York Times is not enough. That's the way it's always been, right? So that's the way I was taught, that the guys in the blue blazers and the loss up there who are running all these things at Time Magazine, this is how they did it, right? All right, so to do anything less, you're fooling yourself. If you really want, if politicians who read, our current president doesn't, same thing, they would go to bed, they would have a book, they would be reading about some historical figure. This was what was accepted. This is what I was told to and believed I should aspire to if I was going to be an educated person in the world. The rules have somehow changed, I don't accept it. All right? And I can't accept it as a college professor. And if you don't want to be there and be engaged and learn, I can't make you learn. So again, and that's, I don't try to sugarcoat any of this. I don't even see it as a privilege. I worked hard to get here. I find of other people, well, I know as soon as I go, there'll be 100 more people who want to take my position, right? There are people in the world who don't think it's a privilege, who want to shut up professors, right? So I don't look at it that way, right? So there has to be both the student and the professor working together. That's the way it's always been.
Aaron just wanted to say
something. I want to go back to the original discussion that we had on general semantics. In 1930, when Korzybski was in Chicago, there was another fellow by the name of Abraham A. Lowe, who was working on semantics from a different point of view, and he was the founder of Mental Health Through Will Training, now known as Recovery International. One of their famous sayings that he coined was, temperamental lingo is alarmist and defeatist by nature and fortifies and intensifies the situation. How that applies to what you were saying is that when we talk about the Mexican story and we try to polarize and propagandize the different circumstances, really we're talking in this type of semantic environment. That's why I want to join these two gentlemen together, because they had a lot of talk between them when they occupied Chicago in the 30s. One developed general semantics and one developed this other linguistic modality which I'm involved with. but you'll see from especially what Arthur said that the current administration's tactic of speaking in a certain way brings out that temperamental factor within people that polarizes them to one side or another. And I think the best thing that we brought out from this evening is just to be aware of these circumstances, semantically, linguistically, propaganda-wise, and in the terms that we were discussing originally. And I just wanted to make that statement and emphasize back the original discussion we were having.
I think that's a great point, and you know, as we go back to the origins, it also points to Korzybski believed in education. You know, he had seminars in general semantics, and he believed that that was the pathway to making a better world. And I think that kind of ties in with what we've been talking about tonight. And it certainly has taken some unanticipated turns in our conversation tonight, but nonetheless a quite interesting one. So I think this would be a good point to end on, and because our time is kind of running out. I would like to again say that the annual Korzybski lecture is the next event that is on October 26th with the symposium following. There are, again, links on the New York Society site, or you can go directly to the Institute of General Semantics site for that. And then our next event for the New York Society will be on Wednesday, October 31st. That's right, Halloween. And we're going to talk about horror. And horror. And you can come in costume. You will be
photographed and put on social media.
So thank you all for coming. This has been a great night, and see you next time.